A member of the Gitskan Nation, Dr. Cindy Blackstock has worked in the field of child and family services for over 20 years. She has authored over 50 publications, many of which have dealt with the causes of disadvantage for Aboriginal children and families, the need for equitable and culturally based interventions, on reconciliation, and First Nations research ethics and ontology. She has served as an advisor for the Northwest Territories Legislative Panel reviewing the Child and Family Services Act, and as an expert member of the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous issues dealing with Indigenous children and youth. Her key interests include exploring and addressing the causes of disadvantage for Aboriginal children and families by promoting equitable and culturally based interventions. Dr. Blackstock currently serves as the Executive Director of the First Nations Child and Family Caring Society of Canada. She is also an Associate Professor at the University of Alberta's Faculty of Extension and the founder of the First Nations Children's Action Research and Education Service. Professor Blackstock delivers keynote speeches, workshop presentations, and lectures about the effects of structural inequalities for First Nations children and strategies for addressing them at over 100 events per year, nationally and internationally. And we are extremely proud to have her here with us tonight as this year's Wunusweh Lecturer. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Cindy Blackstock.
So what a great honor to be on the traditional lands in this sacred territory where so many lessons about children have echoed through the generations. And thank you, Elder, for opening up with the prayer. I was told you need 4 things to change the world. You need knowledge, and a lot of people have that. You need persistence, and some people have that. You need passion, and there will be times when people criticize you for that. And you need spirit, and you always need to remember that. For generations, Canada has had a landscape of a relationship with First Nations children that we cannot feel proud of. One where the message for First Nations children was that they weren't worth the same as everybody else, that their cultures and their ways of being and knowing and the lessons of their ancestors were things to be tossed at the side as progress moved in and a new country emerged. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission is touring the country just now. And there is lots of talk about reconciliation. But for me, the definition that really guides my life's work is that reconciliation means not saying sorry twice. And there's never been a time in the history of this country when there was more that you could do to not only rectify the harms from the past for First Nations children, but to breathe life into the fundamental human values that bind us as a people and as a nation and as a human worldwide community. You know, when I'm looking for wisdom, I often go to elders, but if the elders are not around, I talk to 8-year-olds. Because they make a lot of sense. And just this last February, this is a group of children that were up on Parliament Hill. You see, they decided that they wanted to have their voices heard by the most powerful people in the country. They had a message. They said that all First Nations children deserve a right to grow up safely in their families, be healthy, get a good education, and be proud of who they are. And they all said it in their own different ways. Elliot stood up, he was a non-Aboriginal boy, and he asked the question, why do Aboriginal children deserve the same quality of education, health care, and to grow up with their families than we do? He said, the answer to that question is so obvious, I don't even know why we're standing here. Why are we standing here? Why are we, in this year of 2014, just a couple of years away from Canada's 150th birthday, still having to struggle for equality for children? The Canadian government's role in, as lawyer David Nawagabo so eloquently put it, of placing itself between First Nations children and their families began early on, even before the country itself. But this is the earliest example I could find of a warrant. It's actually a request from Duncan Campbell Scott, many of you know well, the poet, and of course much more famed for his role as the superintendent of Indian Affairs and the architect in many ways of residential schools. And many people think of residential schools as a place where children went to be assimilated, and that's true. And we know the horrible stories of abuse and the deaths at the schools. But what many people aren't aware of is as early as 1895, the warrant allowed for the removal of First Nations children because they were not properly cared for. Back then, at the earliest inception of the schools, these were child welfare placements. But in those days, it wasn't because children weren't being properly cared for, as you and I would understand it today. It was because there was a Western standard of caring for these kids, and the belief was that if we removed them from these families, then we could clear the lands for Canada and these kids would be better off. But are they better off? Even today, are they better off? Are the children that we remove and place in child welfare, are they better off? I was in Australia, and there was an Aboriginal woman there who had been removed and placed in child welfare care. And she said, I have one piece of advice for all you social workers. When you remove us from your families, you are promising us a better life, and you often don't deliver. You often don't deliver. The child welfare system itself makes a lousy parent, and we are now just coming to terms as a people with the multi-generational legacies of residential schools. And I'm going to share with you the emerging pattern of the multi-generational impacts of child welfare itself. When you know better for children, you do better, right? It's part of the fabric of the country of Canada. It doesn't matter if you're on the political right or whether you're on the political left. Doing right by children when you know better, you can do better, and you have the resources to do it, it's fundamental core of every human culture. And yet, as Sheila Fraser has consistently found, the federal government provides lesser funds for First Nations children on reserves than all other Canadians, across a whole dimension of their childhoods, from education to healthcare to the basics like water and sewer to child welfare. And no matter how many reports she tabled, this most credible of women in Ottawa, it was not enough to ensure the equality of this generation of children. So why is that? I think for me, it's a whole question of incremental equality. For some reason, we have become okay in Canada with there being small increments towards equality for First Nations children. That we should be grateful that we're not as unequal as we were last year. But I think, as many of you know, equality is not something to be done in increments. It's something to be done with a leap and a bound. We heard the Prime Minister say recently that education is a priority for First Nations people. I would argue that no, that's not the case. Education is not the priority. Equality and justice are the priority. And those don't come out in topic areas. Equality and justice and respect for treaty rights need to be the floor of the relationship, not the ceiling for which we are forever striving. We need to unhook ourselves from accepting this incremental equality, not only for First Nations children, but for all Canadian people, for all peoples of the world. Because people who live in more equal societies do better. If you want to be a country that has a low incarceration rate, low teen pregnancy rates, high education rates, low mental health rates, low substance abuse rates, you need only do one thing. And that's not building more prisons. And it's not making the Youth Offender Act more punitive for the poor. It is about addressing that income gap between the rich and the poor. If you do that one thing as a country, you find all of these other benefits. So if we lift up the inequalities of First Nations people, we're actually spilling over benefits for all Canadians. And this is based on some of the very best research by Wilkinson and Pickett, and there's also a website, gapminder.org, that I really recommend to people to go see the original data. It's very well supported. The problem in Canada is that gap is getting wider. The Canadian Conference Board says that the gap has tripled between 1980 and 2012. So we're actually creating that gap, and then we're having this spillover effect of more people going to prisons, more people needing to access substance misuse, more people needing to access mental health care. And while addressing those needs at their basis of providing mental health treatment is important, I would argue that it's equally as important that we get at the headwaters of what causes all those problems in the first place. And there's the book that you all are hopefully going to buy. I don't get any royalties from it. I just think everybody should read it. Every Canadian should read it. Now, let's look at kids. We have a G8 economy. And we're coming into the federal election time. I live in Ottawa, so I tend to be right in the hive of the whole thing. And regardless of what political party, they all have one spin. In fact, I think I could be a politician because I've memorized the speeches. And I know that to make the news releases that make me look bad, only release them at 4:30 on a long weekend, right? I've got that figured out. So we have a G8 economy. And these election parties are going to come to all of us as voters in the not too distant future, and they're going to say, you need to vote for me because I'm about jobs in the middle class. And I'm about robust economy. We have a big economy. It's going to mean good things for all of you. And it's a bill of goods a lot of us buy. The problem is it's not true for our kids. We have a G8 economy, but when UNICEF last year ranked the 29 wealthiest countries, our kids are in the back of the pack at number 17. So our kids are living as if they're 17th in the world, not a G8 economy. Now that's bad enough. You think about the future that we're buying for ourselves. These are the children who are going to be staffing our leadership things. They're going to be our future artists, our future truck drivers, our future doctors. And we're leaving them behind. It doesn't make good economic sense. It doesn't make good social sense. But the picture gets even worse when you consider the question, how much effort are we being put into this? Because it's interesting for me. I mean, when I listen to these different political leaders, and they're saying why they can't invest more in kids, particularly around First Nations. We're doing everything we can. This is what we're going to do for this year. They've got kind of two rote things. Number one, they say we're remote. Now, am I the only person in the country that realizes that the only time the government uses the word remote is when it comes to people? There's no place too remote if there's diamonds, oil, or minerals under your land. They'll be up there eating seal meat in a week. We had a guy twittering from space. The Prime Minister didn't say he's too remote to get him up a Twitter feed. You know? And we also get fed this line that these issues are complex. But getting clean water into communities isn't complex. We can send a DART team down to an earthquake-ravaged country and have fresh water pumping in 24 hours. So why aren't we insisting that that's done for every person who lives here in Canada, especially the First Peoples? These are not choices of complexity, and they're not choices of remoteness. So let's look at the economic stream. Is it that Canada really is, given its wealth, putting as much effort into this as possible? Well, there's an interesting organization that wanted to test that question. They're called the Kids' Rights Foundation. Some of you may be familiar with them. They partner with the Nobel laureates every year to award the International Children's Peace Prize. Malala from Pakistan won it this last year. A very well-respected organization. And they decided, wouldn't it be interesting to partner with the School of Economics and then rate the countries in proportion to how much effort they're putting into children in proportion to their wealth. And this was released in November of last year. And you can't find us on the first page because we're 60th in the world, 60 in the world. Who's ahead of us? China. the Republic of Moldova. This is the future that we're carving out, not just for First Nations children, but for all Canadians. So regardless of whether, and I know tough choices have to be made at the provincial, territorial, First Nations government level and at the federal government, but by choosing to leave our kids behind, we are setting in place for ourselves a future we would not want to inherit. We are setting our kids and our grandchildren up for a life of 60th in the world instead of a G8 economy. We're not passing along the very best of our country to the next generation. And that goes against every human instinct, isn't it? For all of you who are parents or aunts or uncles or neighbors of kids, you want it even better than you had it. And yet that's not the way we're governing ourselves. It's not the choices we're making as a community. So let's talk about this discrimination in federal services. And I know that's a heavy word to use, but I use it deliberately because I believe it to be true. And where do these inequalities happen? Well, unfortunately, as the Vice Chief would tell you, the traditional laws of First Nations people have been wrongfully displaced by provincial territorial legislation in child welfare, education, and health. And that in and of itself is a matter of controversy. And it's not because I'm an idealist. I think that we should take the very best of Western ideas when they're in keeping with the needs of children. But the bottom line is these statutes have not served First Nations children well. And the time when they were best cared for was in a time predating that, when they were being cared for according to their own laws and customs. But nonetheless, the situation today is the provincial laws apply. They apply off reserve as well, but the provinces fund those services. On reserve, the federal government does. And if the federal government provides lesser amounts of funding, the provinces typically do not top it up. I worked in the Squamish First Nation in North Vancouver, which is right in the metropolitan area. And across the street, those kids got more. And the worst part about it is the kids on reserve knew it. Imagine if you are one of those children who gets less, not because you're not trying hard, not because you're not a good person, but because of who you are. Children see it really clearly. A little girl named Bethany, she said, discrimination is when the government doesn't think you're worth the money. And she wonders why adults aren't out there marching with her on Valentine's Day. What could be more important than standing up against any regime of any political stripe that tells children that you're not worth the money? This is Jordan River Anderson. He's a baby from Norway House Cree Nation. He was born with complex medical needs into the family of Virginia Anderson and Ernest Anderson and their family. Virginia was from Peter Ballantine First Nation here in Saskatchewan. Now, Jordan had to be born in Winnipeg's General Hospital simply because he had those medical needs. But that was difficult enough. Imagine yourselves, some of you have been parents who have had a sick child in a hospital. You know how traumatic that is. And you also know that sometimes parents have to make difficult choices, just as this family did. Virginia stayed with him while he got better, and his dad went up to Norway House to look after the other kids. But the day finally came after 2 long years where the doctors were happy to place him in a family home near the hospital, so that in case things didn't go well, he could be near the help he needed, but he could be in a family setting. If he was a non-Aboriginal child, he would have gone home that day, and we would not have heard his story other than to know that this boy grew up and hopefully had a very healthy and happy life. But he was a First Nations child. So the government of Manitoba said, we're not going to pay for that because that's a federal responsibility. And the federal government said, well, we don't have authority to pay for that, and provinces have health care responsibility, so we're not going to pay for it. They had a Mexican standoff, these governments, and they decided to leave this baby in the hospital while they argued over who should pay. We were running a $10 billion surplus budget. I have yet to find one taxpayer who would have been against providing for that child's at-home care with their tax money during that time. The bureaucrats said they didn't want to set a precedent. We don't want to pay for this cost because then everybody will expect it. And I said, yes, they do. And shouldn't we be setting a precedent of equality when it comes to kids? Jordan's family. They say that, really, in the end, Jordan died of a broken heart. He waited over 2.5 years in that hospital for someone, anyone, to put his needs first. No one was able to convince the governments. No one was able to break the logjam. The doctors wrote, the family wrote, the First Nations wrote. It just continued on. And so it was, just after Jordan's 5th birthday, that he slips into a coma and he passes away, never having spent a day in the family home because of who he was in 2005. At that same time, we were doing a national study, and we found many children in the same situation. The family asked only one thing: please do not let it happen to another child. And so with their support, and the support of the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs and the AFN and others, we created Jordan's Principle, which simply says when a government service is available to all others, then a First Nations child should be able to access it on the same terms. And if there's payment issues, they can argue about that later. It passed unanimously in the House of Commons in 2007. I can still remember sitting up in the gallery as you were sitting with Ernest Anderson. It was dark up there. I think the politicians like to keep the public in the dark, just in general. That was my theory, sitting up in the gallery. But I'll always remember looking over at Ernest Anderson that evening. And he was watching as people were standing up for the vote. But unlike a normal votes in Parliament, they stood standing until not a single seat was left in the sitting position. I wondered what he thought, seeing what was happening below his son's name. These are the people who could have stopped it when he was alive. And yet this gracious man stands up right at the Parliament, and he leans over and he salutes them. And he says only this: don't let the good being done in my son's name just be a moral victory. The government of Canada would go on to make it pretty much as Ernest feared. See, they started to reinterpret Jordan's Principle. They said it only applied to children with complex medical needs with multiple service providers. And not surprisingly, by 2010, the government proclaimed there was not one single case of Jordan's Principle anywhere in the country. So let me ask you here, does anyone know of a First Nations child who's being denied or delayed receipt of a government service because they're First Nations? So all the minister needed to do was come to a gathering like this and to see those cases are alive and well. Now, I'm going to ask you, as one of the things that you can do for children tonight, to go and learn about Jordan's Principle, and if you're supportive of it, to sign up, because your support means more than ever. You see, there was a lady in Pictou Landing First Nation in Nova Scotia who is about to test even Canada's very narrow definition of whether complex medical needs and multiple service providers would apply in Jordan's Principle. But I want to show you first a document. Because some people think, well, the government doesn't know about these situations, that's why they're not moving on it. This is a document that was filed with the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal that we're going to talk about in a minute. It's never been seen before by the public. It was not available to the public because it was formed part of Canada's disclosure, but it is now, of course, filed at the tribunal, and thus I can share it with you here. I was the last witness at the tribunal for the First Nation side, and I found myself having to read this document. And even though I had read it before, when I said the words aloud, I physically felt sick. Because I believe in the goodness of all people. And yet I could not stomach the normalcy with which this is written. It says, a child with multiple disabilities or complex medical needs requires a wheelchair and stroller and requires that a lift and tracking device be installed in his or her family home. The non-insured health benefits plan, that's the one on reserve, will provide children with only one item every 5 years. Think about how big your child was 5 years ago. If the item is a wheelchair, NIHB supports the provision of manual wheelchairs only, which must be fitted with seating inserts in order to accommodate small children. If the item is a ceiling-mounted lift and tracking device, funding is not provided by NIHB to install the device in a family home. How many people here would feel confident installing a lift device for a child with a disability in your home? How many people here would object to your tax dollars being used for that purpose? If these same children were to reside off reserve, they would be eligible to receive more than one mobility device if needed, and any installation costs would be borne by the provincial program providing the mobility device. This is written by the government for the government. And so it's really clear they know these things are happening. Meet Marina Beadle. She is a mother, a very proud mother. She says the greatest gift that ever happened to her was being a mother. She loves Jeremy with all her heart. If she were here, she would tell you first of how he just comes alive with the powwow drum and how much he loves art. What is equally true is he has cerebral palsy and autism. And he requires assistance with all of his daily living and daily dignities. Marina had attended to his well-being for the first 15 years of his life. She would tell me that she slept lightly because she didn't want Jeremy to call her and she wouldn't hear him. She had learned all those years to sleep with one ear open, just in case he needed her. When he was 15 years old, she had a double stroke so severe she could not walk. Her first thought was for her son. Off reserve, there was a Supreme Court of Nova Scotia decision called the Boudreau decision that said that if you are a child of similar needs off reserve, the provincial government must fund the level of services that medical professionals say you require. And so all that needed to be done in this case was for those same medical professionals to survey the health of Jeremy and to find out what those needs were. And that was done. And then they went to the federal government. Federal government said, well, we're not going to pay any attention to this Supreme Court of Nova Scotia decision for reasons we still don't understand. And instead, what they're prepared to do is offer a fixed level of care for Jeremy, for at-home care, and that fell far below what healthcare professionals felt he needed for his daily life and well-being and safety. So the federal government outlines a series of options. They said, well, no worries, Marina. You can take this help that we're providing you, but if things deteriorate so badly in your home, child welfare can intervene and we'll pay for that. Or you could place your son hundreds of miles away in an institution and the government will pay for that. So what would you do? You're a single mom, you're an elder, you have a stroke, and you're caring for a special needs boy, and you're in that circumstance. Well, they underestimated Marina Beadle, who decided that she would file a charter challenge against the federal government, alleging that they were breaching the charter for failing to implement Jordan's principle. Justice Mandaman, some of you know him, heard the case in the federal court. And the federal court agreed with Marina that the federal government's interpretation of Jordan's principle was flawed and narrow. And the federal court ordered the federal government to pay for Jeremy's care and to pay for Marina's legal costs. It was a day of great celebration. I went to Pictou Landing. There was a whole community celebration. But only a few days later, a notice of appeal arrived from the federal government. So the case is now before the Federal Court of Appeal. And although I sadly predicted that that probably would happen, and I think Marina knew it too, the thing that I cannot understand is that the federal government is also going after court costs from Marina Beetle. They want her to cover their legal fees. So this case is going to be heard in the spring of 2014 or the summer of 2014. The Caring Society is intervening in it. We're hopeful that it will set a national precedent for Jordan's Principle, and we can finally honor the words of Ernest Anderson and make sure that the good done in his son's name is something lived out in the reality for all children. And you can see here for Saskatchewan, this is the report card done by the Canadian Pediatric Society, because provinces should be implementing Jordan's Principle too, but Saskatchewan only got a fair rating, which is second from the bottom. So there's more to be done in terms of the embracing of Jordan's Principle in the province of Saskatchewan. Let's talk about child welfare. There are more First Nations kids in child welfare care today than at the height of residential schools. There are more First Nations children in child welfare care today than in the 60s scoop. For all of us who look back at those times and think that we know better now, historian John Malloy often cautions that the only thing we learn from those things is to become more efficient at the removal of First Nations children. And why are they in child welfare care? Well, there's nobody in this room, including me, that would ever want a child to be in an unsafe situation. And I absolutely believe that some First Nations children need to be in foster care, but not at the unbelievable rates that we're seeing across the country. This is Saskatchewan. If you are a First Nations child in Saskatchewan, you're 12 times more likely to end up in foster care than if you're a non-Aboriginal child. 12 times more likely. Now, some people say, well, what is the biggest... If I was to take this audience and I was trying to predict how many of you would have your kids in foster care, I would ask only one question. And it wouldn't be if you abuse substances, although if I had two questions, that might be it. I'd ask you how much you make a year. It is the biggest predictor of foster care around the world. In fact, there's a great study in the United States that says if you earn below $15,000 a year, your family is 22 times more likely to have your child in foster care than if you earn over $30,000 a year. It is a huge driver, and that's why we see so many First Nations kids in care. It's poverty, poor housing, and substance misuse. All things we could do something about. In fact, we were talking over the lovely dinner that we had. There's a program in the United States where some of the states have amended their statutes to prohibit the removal of children for poverty, and to require a positive obligation of the state to remediate any poverty before removal is approved. And there's also something called the Family Unification Program, where they provided $15 million to child welfare workers to help families with housing who are at risk of losing their kids. Now, $15 million is a drop in the bucket to the US government, let's face that. They spend more putting stickers on one of their jets than the $15 million. But $15 million at least is something. And what did they find when child welfare workers were able to use that for the first and last month's rent? Or to get rid of black mold contamination? Or to renovate that bathroom for that child with a disability? Or to add on a bedroom to an overcrowded home? They saved 7,500 kids from going into foster care and saved the taxpayer $131 million in foster payments. Those are the types of child welfare interventions we need to see here in Saskatchewan and across the country. But they will not be possible until we equalize the opportunity for success on reserve. I used to be one of these really naive people who believed the stuff that I was taught in my public policy course. See, I was taught that if you go in there and there's a problem in public policy, and for example, in my case, you prove the inequality exists, and then not only that, you work with the government to create a solution that's affordable to the government, that they'll do the right thing. All you have to do is go shake hands with a few MPs and all good things will happen. The problem is that's not the way the real world works. For over a decade, I and many others before me and with me, and since then too, First Nations agency directors and experts and chiefs and members of council stood with the federal government, and we documented the inequalities not once, not twice, but 3 times. We came up with solution after solution. And the federal government was excited about these solutions when we released them, but they never implemented them. Never. And I'll never forget the day one time when I came upon an Indian Affairs statistic that said at the time when we were sitting in that room having muffins and trying to stress over another solution, the rate at which First Nations children had gone into foster care increased 71.5%. So what do you do? Here we are, the Caring Society, the only national First Nations organization in the country, and we had at the time 5 staff. We had $50,000 in the bank. We had a lot of prayer. But we realized that if we went back to those tables again, that things probably wouldn't get better for the kids. So we knew we had to do something else. And so the Chiefs Assembly of First Nations passed a resolution in 2006 giving authority for the filing of a human rights complaint. That complaint was filed on February 23rd, 2007, and I'll never forget that day. National Chief Phil Fontaine was in power then. We announced it in Parliament. And I still can remember thinking how shocking it was that we had to file it anyway. I still say that to people. I can't believe we had to file a case against the federal government to get them to treat kids equally. But there we were. It was one of the biggest human rights cases of our time. Not only because it affected 163,000 First Nations children from coast to coast to coast, but because it put a red-hot poker stick into the conscience of the nation. After all, if we are going to save money, if one of our approaches for fiscal restraint is to racially discriminate against children, then what are we standing on guard for when we sing that national anthem? Truly. So we filed the case. Within 30 days, we lost all of our federal government money. That's what democracy looks like. But I still remember knowing the day I remember things were okay. I was stressing out about this. I mean, I knew that lawyers cost more than $50,000. But an envelope arrived in the mail, and it had pencil crayon on the outside. I like letters with pencil crayon on the outside. It's always a good sign. And I opened up the letter, and it said, "Dear Cindy," it was spelled S-I-N-D-Y. "Here's some M-U-N-Y for the kids. Love, Ella." And inside was $1.67 from her piggy bank. To this very day, the biggest donors to the Caring Society are kids. And they own the Caring Society. And you know what it is about children is that they know they may not be lawyers, they may not be politicians, they may not be economists or doctors, but they're experts in love and fairness. And they know when something's wrong and they want to do something about it. So we launched this I Am a Witness campaign. And we wondered if anyone would sign up. We loaded up all the court documents on both sides, and we simply asked Canadians to watch. We don't want you to take a side. You don't have to take a side. You can just watch. And one of the first groups in there was a group of kids. They came to one of the very first hearings. They were from alternate school. The young man there said to me, "We're from alternate school, which means that we get into trouble a lot." And I said, "That's good, so do I." We'll talk about that in a minute. I get in a lot of trouble. But he said, "The reason that we're here is that sometimes we deserve to get into trouble, but sometimes it's the system that deserves to get into trouble. And this is the only time we've ever seen the system being held accountable for what it does to kids." So those same kids went away and they came back to the next hearing wearing their own newly designed I Am a Witness t-shirts. And so throughout the whole court hearing, the numbers of children and young people who would be attending in the court grew and grew and grew. And what did they hear? Well, they heard the government. See, the government for the first 6 years of this case spent over $3 million trying to derail it on 2 legal technicalities that may make sense to lawyers but don't make sense for those of us who care about kids. The first is, it's not fair for us as a federal government for you to compare federal funding to provincial funding. Not fair. I didn't think this case was about fairness for the federal government. Maybe I missed a page when I filed it. The second thing is that it's these child welfare workers who are discriminating, not me, the funder. You know, if you're not able to stretch your dollar so you're providing the same level of care as these better funded people over there, then it's you should be held accountable, not me, the funder. 6 years they tried to derail it, but unsuccessfully. And this is what they didn't want you to see. On February 25th of 2007, we entered the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal. It's the only time I know in the history of any developed nation where a country has been on trial for its contemporary treatment of First Nations children before a body that can make a legal finding of discrimination and order it to fix the problem. Now, this is one of its own documents. This is the funding formula they use here for child welfare in Saskatchewan. And in the early parts of the case, they were arguing that there is no inequality. This enhanced focus prevention approach, which they called it. By the way, I've just noticed, because I've done access to information requests, they use the word enhanced a lot. Education is enhanced, income assistance is enhanced, everything's enhanced. But they were saying that it fixed the problem until I got his DVD through access to information. This is a briefing note to the deputy minister. And what you can see there is that they're saying that the shortfall in this thing to become comparable is $43.1 million. This is the department's own estimate of what it would be required to reach comparability. And in some of the communities, they're still on an old formula, so it's $65 million for them for a total of $108 plus an inflation driver. So again, it's not as if they don't know it. At the highest levels, they're briefing up about the lack of comparability, and they also know something else. You see, in those same documents is a host of documents where they're getting advice from justice. Why? Because they're worried that these kids who are going to grow up in foster care will be abused there and will become knocking on the federal government's door in civil liability claims when they're adults. And shouldn't they? I think they should too, but I won't want them to have to knock on that door. I think, like you, I'd like to see a generation of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit children who do not have to recover from their childhoods. We owe them that as a people. Aboriginal People's Television Network has been televising the whole hearings. You can watch all of the evidence yourself by going onto their website and clicking onto that banner. You don't need to rely on what I would say to you. You can hear it for yourself. And if you come on the right day, you might just meet a few of our supporters. I think one of the most difficult documents I was taken to during my last week of testimony on February 13th was a document that listed the number of days that First Nations children had spent out of their homes since we filed the case. Some kids go into foster care for a day or two, and others for a year or more. What does it look like if you added up all those nights that those kids have spent away from home? 12 million nights. 12 million nights. When I added it up from 1989 to 2012, it was 66 million nights. And what does that mean in years? 187,000 years of childhood growing up in foster care instead of in their families. I travel a lot, and I always look forward to going home. Some of you are looking forward to going home to your own kids tonight. But can you imagine for 12 million nights, little kids dreaming about going home and not being given the opportunity? Because the government, as Bethany says, thinks they're not worth the money. But as I say, the government has more money than I do, definitely. And they have more lawyers than I'll ever have, which I think in some ways is a good thing. But my supporters are far more cute. And children, this is a sign the kids actually made. It says, just because we're not small, doesn't mean we can't stand tall. And that's really true for all of us, isn't it? It's really about making the decision to be the difference. and to take that action, that we find things changing in our own society. Caring is not enough. And so, as I say, if you come to the tribunal on a certain day, you'll be able to meet other members of the gallery. This is the kids in 2012 before the federal court. I remember that it was a very unusual hearing for the federal court. We had to move it to the Supreme Court of Canada building because so many children wanted to attend, we had to book them in shifts. And I remember the security guy, because all the kids had to go through security. They loved that, right? You know, can you see my body underneath? You know, like this. And the security guy said, well, he said, I thought it was going to be like a daycare, but these kids were so well behaved. So imagine yourself how this would affect a courtroom if there's a hearing about children and this is who's sitting in the benches. What would they possibly take away from it? Now, I'm not a lawyer, I'm a social worker, and I have to tell you, some of the legal gobbledygook even makes my eyes glaze over. So I was wondering the same thing. But there was a little boy there, and he was in about grade 5, and he drew a line down a piece of paper, blank piece of paper, and he had all kinds of scores, you know, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And he had listened to Canada's arguments about why this case should be tossed on those comparator and service issues all morning. And so he had a long list on one side and a short list on the other. And he said, Cindy, you got to check this out. He said, first of all, he said, the bathrooms are marble. He said, this is a fancy place. And he was right. I went into the bathroom, and I turned the tap, and the tap came off in my hand, and I thought, oh my God, this isn't good. But I came back out, and he told me what those things meant. He said, the long list is when the judge asked the Canada people a question, and the short list is when they answered. And a little girl who was there, she was only about 5 or 6, she said, if this case is about kids, then why are the people who are talking, the lawyers, why are the people who are talking about everything except for what's best for kids? Now, you would wonder what's happening at the coffee break. Well, you would find these kids outside. You see, they realize that promises are not enough, that adults are well-meaning, but you don't always do what you say you're going to do. So you need a little bit of support. And so these kids decided they would go to Parliament Hill and they would read their letters on Valentine's Day to send the government some love. And let's face it, it does need that, right? And so what did the kids say in their letters? Well, Bethany steps up to the light, a beautiful blonde-haired girl with blue eyes, and she says, Dear Prime Minister Harper, I think you should go back to grade 5 because that's where you learn about the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And if you read that thing, you would know you're breaking your own laws. And then we had Elliot, and he said, I don't know why you're over in China talking to them about their human rights when you got lots of problems back here. And then there was Harry. He had written his letter 4 times and thrown it in the garbage can. See, he is a child that didn't think anyone ever wanted to listen to him. But he had the strength, and I think this says something positive about children. They're prepared to come or overcome their own barriers, their own fears, to do the right thing. So he dug his letter out of the garbage can, and he allowed it to be read on Parliament Hill. He said, Dear Prime Minister Harper, do you have a cat? I have a cat. His name is Harry. He's black, and he's a boy. And then he gets down to business. He said, Stephen Harper, listen to me. If you do not build more schools, you're going to create a crime wave and lose all of your money. Because kids who cannot go to school cannot get jobs, and they're going to grow up and still need money, so some of them are going to have to steal it. And then people in the community are going to get mad because crooks are going to be invading your homes. And since you're in charge, you're going to have to fix this mess. So why don't you man up right now and build more schools? Love, Harry. The kids keep coming back every single year because they're not going to stop until every child actually gets treated properly. They want to believe the promises that come, but they know that they're only ever real when they're lived out in the lives of children. When I asked a group of grade 3 kids, when I just came from a government meeting and the government bureaucrats were saying, it's too complicated to implement Jordan's principle, I decided I'd go ask my peer group of experts. And I said, how would you implement Jordan's principle? Hands went up right away. Rock, paper, scissors, says one of the kids. And then a little girl said, well, shouldn't they take turns? Shouldn't adults take turns? Like we take turns? Like one pays for it this time and another next time? But that way kids don't get hurt? This is a book the kids wrote. You can get all their letters. It's being used in Ontario as a core piece of curriculum in elementary schools. And if you go on to the website, the kids have written curriculum and also made it really easy with you in terms of providing you all kinds of learning resources, including their own videos. Doing the right thing gets you into trouble. I had never, ever thought in my life that I'd be under surveillance by the government of Canada. I think we need to talk about this. So when you are going to take something like this, even if it's the right thing, I should do all my disclaimers. Number one, I don't have a criminal record. I don't have a parking ticket. And unfortunately, as we'll all know, I don't live a very spicy life. So I should be, the most militant thing I do is go to Parliament with Valentines with children. So I should not be on the top list of terms of, like, let's put her under surveillance. But when you're going to take on something like this, you need to have the moral courage to see it through to the end. We had a great teaching by an elder when we created the Caring Society. He said, never fall in love with your organization. And never fall in love with your position. Only fall in love with the children, because you may have to sacrifice both of those things for them. It was the best piece of advice we ever got. And as much as I love the Caring Society, I'd be prepared to see it go tomorrow. And it might go. We have 2 part-time staff and 2 full-time staff and a shoestring budget made of lemonade stands. But we know from the spirit of those kids that we're doing the right thing and we'll make it. What's most important to us is not that we make it as an organization, but the kids make it. How surprised I was to get a batch of emails under the Access to Information Act that read like this. The context of the department looking at her Facebook and Twitter accounts is that she was posting court documents and making other relevant comments about her litigation. That would be the child welfare litigation. I didn't file that case in my name. It was filed in the Caring Society, which could affect the litigation and ultimately show she has other motives or is making vexatious or frivolous claims on these accounts. There's other emails between NC officials that say, we were on her personal Facebook page, but we stopped after 6 months because we realized justice was also on there. You could just share information. As a taxpayer, I thought, well, at least I'm only paying for spying on me once. I did a talk in the middle of the Australian desert with Indigenous people, and there were notes about that talk, exactly what I said. There are notes about meetings I was not at. They'd say, there's a meeting going on, she's not here. You know, it's one thing. There's one thing because they were putting out this thing, they said, well, it's just because Dr. Blackstock, Cindy Blackstock, she and the department, we share the same interests. So we just happen to run into each other a lot. Well, one of the tribunal members on the retaliation complaint said, did you just happen to be in the middle of the desert of Australia? You just happened to be there. You know, I think that the reason that I decided to take this claim public was not so much for me. I'm prepared for this. It is worth it for the kids. But no Canadian should ever have to endure 189 different public servants following them in their private and public life simply because you challenge a legitimate public policy claim. And it definitely shouldn't happen in a human rights context where many people filing those claims are a lot more vulnerable than I am. It absolutely should not happen. The Privacy Commissioner found that Canada was in breach of the Privacy Act in going onto my personal Facebook page. The thing that made me the most upset was there is comments posted there by children. One was by a child who is 12 years old. They say, "Hello, my name is X." I'm not going to use the name of the child. "And I am 12 years old. I just wanted to thank you for the work you do." Justice took that email and the URL identifier on Facebook and sent it around to about 10, 12 people within Justice. Like, there's something wrong with that as a country, right? Something wrong with that as a country. So we all need to stand up against this stuff because it's really about access to justice. And it's about clearing the way so that other people can bring legitimate claims. The government, if they disagree with it, can fight it in court and use the proper procedures, but they should not be peeking behind the curtains of Canadians and trying to dig up dirt in order to support their claims. Now, this actually worked in my favor, as it turned out, because I didn't know there's a whole international community that's interested in surveillance, including the Nobel Women's Initiative, who before took no interest really in the case or didn't know about it, but it became so high profile that it was recognized last year as one of the 16 most important human rights activism efforts by women around the world. And this is a credit to the kids, but it also is about how you choose to respond to this type of retribution by Canada. I really believe that, especially when we're working with children, we must only respond to it with honor. I will never release the names of all those public servants involved because it's not about them. It's about a higher public policy. And we must, no matter what the winds are that come against us, we must only stand in integrity for those kids. Because the real victims in this are the children, not any of us in this room. Bethany says, there are kids in the country. Canada's slogan is from sea to sea to sea. And yet, the government doesn't really look after the people in the north. And for children in Canada who are going to school in run-down portables or don't have heat and water in their homes, they don't know the words liberal or conservative or New Democrat. But they do know the words of hope and justice and peace. Words that unite us versus divide us. Nonpartisanship, Bethany says, a 13-year-old girl, is something we're all born with. And it's not that having different ideas is a bad thing. It helps us become a rich and better country. But there are some things where we just have to raise our humanity above those teams. She said, shouldn't we all be doing as the old saying says, and paying for the team on the front of the sweater and not the team on the back? She says, the people in power in this country need to remember that they need to play for all children in Canada, not just the children of the people who run it. You all have a choice tonight. 50 years, maybe you'll be sitting with your own grandchildren, and they will ask you what was happening for First Nations children in 2014, and you did. And was there something that you could have done to help? And yes, there was, in under 2 minutes and completely free. And if you really want to help us, you can show up on a walk called Our Dreams Matter Too, where you write your own letter to your own elected official, and you walk to your mailbox and mail it. Just like Bethany and Elliot and the other hundreds of children on Parliament Hill. And did you do it? Did you do something? There are 12 million reasons why you can't stand still any longer. I want to one day, before I leave this earth, and I'm 50 now, so I've only got a few years left, I want to be able to sing that song, "O Canada, we stand on guard for thee," and know that when I sing that, it means a respect and honoring of the treaty relationships, the justice, and the equality of children, and that we finally turn the page on this long and dark history of oppression and inequality to one of hope and inspiration. and one where Harry gets his wish, and that Prime Minister Harper finally mans up and does the right thing. Thank you very much.